I'm very excited to be talking about visualizing election data. I know it gives a lot of people anxiety to look at these kinds of maps, but I find them very fascinating. And so I'm just going to dive right into it. Typically, when we look at election maps, they look something similar to this, where you see color representing the winner of an election and size, which will indicate by how much they won by, or the margin of victory. And we also see maps that look like this. So this is a New York Times example of visualizing swing from the 2012 election to the 2016 election. I really like this style. When I first saw it, I immediately fell in love with it. I think it's very effective at showing that. But we don't see a ton of maps that show trend over more than just a couple of elections. And so that's what I really want to get into here. This particular map here from 2016 drew my attention specifically to Utah. And that was because that stuck out as a traditional red state. You had a lot of big left-leaning arrows in that election. And I found that fascinating, so I went to dig in a little deeper in the data. And looking at this pop-up here for Utah County, you look at the vote percentage in 2012 for the Republican candidate was 88.3%, like a huge, huge share of the vote. And that dropped all the way down to 50%, so 38 percentage point difference. And so the symbology led me to believe that there was a leftward shift towards the Democratic candidate in that election. But when you look at the total vote share, it went from about 10% in 2012 to only 14%. So it's about a 4% percentage point change. So where did those votes go, that 38 percentage point drop? Well, they went to another candidate. And so I felt like there was an opportunity to add third-party candidates into this visualization. And so I created my own version of this map, which revealed this pattern instead. So if you take a look at the pop-up, you'll see the same numbers there for Utah County, but instead of just showing the Democratic and Republican candidate compared with each other, there's a category for others. And so you see a whopping 67,000 votes of increase from the previous election. And so in my view, it was clear that the voters in Utah in that particular election did not have that leftward shift. They just didn't like either party in that case and opted to go or to predominantly shift towards other candidates. And if we zoom out, you see this is what the overall map looked like from this application that I created. Well, this got me thinking and going down all kinds of rabbit holes, like what can we do to visualize change of individual parties in one symbol? And so then I created this map, and this was the topic of a NACIS presentation I did a few years ago, where I use a composite symbol to show the growth or decline in votes for each individual party in each geography. So the hollow symbol indicates a drop of votes, and of course the solid symbol would be an increase, and it's proportional to the absolute value. So you see areas outside Atlanta that have a steady decrease in Republican votes, but then a massive increase in Democratic votes in the 2016 election. What's fascinating about this style is when you go to the state level, I started to see patterns that were not obvious with the arrow map. So when you think about a state swinging from one side to the other in a particular election, you kind of see what you saw in Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, a decrease in votes for one party, in this case the Democratic side, and an increase for the Republican side. And of course, this was a weird election in the sense that there was a lot of votes for third parties. But look at Wisconsin. This one, super fascinating. That state swung towards the Republican side in that election, but they didn't have an increase in Republican votes. They actually had a decrease. So we can attribute that swing to people who traditionally or previously voted for the Democratic candidate either not showing up to vote that day or opting to vote for a third party. But the Republican ended up winning in that state. That's a pattern you would not see in the arrow map. It would probably just show a red pointing arrow. So again, very fascinating. So I ended up, creating a bunch of these visualizations. I wrote several blogs about them, would present at conferences on this topic. And I was presenting at the Esri Developer Summit a few years ago, more generically about change over time, and I was showing off these maps. And then one of the attendees, after the session, approached me with a sketch. This is not her sketch, but this is my recreation of it. And it was this symbol off to the left here. And she proposed, well, instead of showing change over time along a slider, and I'll show you this slider that she was talking about in just a minute here, she's like, what if you showed the trend using a composite symbol where you put the symbols all next to each other in a row, and you color it based off the winner? And is that possible with your software? And I said, well, of course it is. I just haven't tried it, but I believe it's possible. It turned out to be a lot more complicated than I thought it would be. So I'll show you some of the complication with that. And so I then augmented her sketch with this one off to the right. I'm like, well, maybe we could also vary the size to show this trend. And then after a lot of failed attempts and time that felt wasted for a long time, I was able to finally be successful in creating that symbol. And here's a preview of it. So you can actually also click the pop-up and get a detailed view as to the breakdown of each of the previous 5 elections. So what's nice about this one is it actually takes that initial winner map, so winner with color, margin of victory by size, and then you just stick them all together. So it can be more intuitive for the end user in that sense. They're used to those symbols. It's just sticking them together into one composite. So let's take a look at this live application. So this is the app I created. It explores various techniques. So you just have your classic winner style, and this is the slider I was showing to show change over time. This is really good for just looking at individual elections to see who won in individual states, or even down to the county level if you zoom in. I also opted to shade the winner of the state and not the county because it's the state vote that matters in the US elections, but I still show the counties with the marker color that represents the winner in that specific county. So that's great for showing the winner, but it's not awesome for showing trend. You have to really move that slider around to try to see if there's a noticeable trend, and it requires a lot of cognitive work for your brain to figure that out. So let me zoom back out here. Another way of looking at basically the same map is what I call the winner with lean. So in this case, this is not the swing map. The colors of the arrows represent the winner of the election, and then the orientation is how much did they, what share of the vote did they have? So if we, again, go to 2012, and you look at Utah County here, that's gonna be pretty far to the right. If it's a 90-degree angle, that means they won 100% of the votes. And in this case, they had 88%, so it's gonna be very near that 90-degree mark. And then, of course, you switch over to 2016. The Republican candidate still won in that election, but by a narrower margin. So that's what the lean map is showing. Here I have the swing map. So in this case, this is not a look at who won. It's how much did the votes shift and what was the predominant, or which party had the predominant shift. So again, we have that interesting pattern in 2016. Oops. Let me go back here to 2004 and then just kind of step through it a little bit. So you could see when Obama won in 2008, there was a lot of shift to the left. And then back to the right, he still won in the 2012 election, but there was only one or a couple of states that flipped back to the Republican side. And then we go through the more recent elections here. So fun examples of visualizing swing. Also difficult to view trend for multiple elections. And then here's this fun symbol that I talked about before. If I zoom in a little more, we get the labels, and you can see that on a state level. So here's Wisconsin. So this, again, the swing states are shaded to show where did the change actually make an effect in changing the electoral vote. As we zoom into specific counties, you also get it on the county level. If I zoom in a little closer, and of course you get a pop-up that will should match the selected election with the actual numbers. Okay, and finally, this trend map here. So this is showing on the state level. This is really good at showing where states are consistent. So California, for example, solidly Democrat for the last 5 elections. You see states that have different trends. So you have Florida down here, which leaned Democrat the last in 2008, 2012, but then has increased its Republican support in the last 3 elections. And then you see states like in the Midwest here, where they have more contested elections. And so in the pop-up, I like to try to summarize that. It was contested here, but it tends to lean Democrat. This is also really good at showing aberrations in the pattern. So if you look at Georgia, for example, it tends to show that they tend to favor Republicans, but there was the 2020 election where the Democrat won narrowly. Same with Arizona in that election. You can see that come into play. Also, Indiana in 2008. So if we, a little bit of symbol overlap here, you can see that come through here. So very fascinating. Also on the county level, you can see Atlanta and its suburbs have been a story in the last few elections. So if you take a look at this county here, Henry County was tended to lean Republican, but now more strongly Democrat. What's cool about this symbol too is you can still hook it up to a slider and achieve some kind of exploration of trend while visualizing that. You can see the movement of the trend line, but not overly overwhelming the end user with too many squares. So I can look at 2020 and those and the other elections in context. So you can see Douglas County is fascinating because it's very clear that it formerly voted Republican and then steadily grew to Democrat. So that's the application there. I also included these legends. I felt it was appropriate to also include examples to help aid the user in understanding and reading the map. So I gave examples of symbols there, along with the overall election results for each year. All right. So how did I make this? The web app was, I started with a web map in Map Viewer, NACIS Online. I did as much as I could there first with those initial layers. You can actually, a lot of people don't know this because it's relatively new. You can write a time series arcade expression that allows you to use the time slider. What this does is it actually changes the pointer or the reference to the data in the underlying render. It doesn't filter. So the traditional time slider sense in ArcGIS is it filters your data. That's not what's happening here. We get much better performance by just loading the data and not having to reset a filter. So I set that up, and then I add layers for the complicated styles, the composite symbols that I can't configure in ArcGIS Online, but I'll configure later. Just to give you a quick sense of that right here, here's the map in ArcGIS Online. You see all the visualization styles here, and here's my time slider to show you that it does work here. And if I look at the arcade expression, it's written there. And you also have this time series suggestion. This is available in any web map, so if you open up ArcGIS Online, you will see this expression available. You just have to fill in your variables there, and you'll get this time slider, and it will work. So I did that with these first 3, and then set up default symbology, because I can't set up the composite symbols in Online at this point. All right. Second step is to create the web application using the JavaScript SDK. I first load the web map as JSON. This is the code for how you do that with the web map class. Pull it in with its item ID from Online. Then I can build out an app with calcite components and then update or create my custom symbology with ArcGIS Core. And that's where step 3 comes into play. So I'm only going to show the trend box, since I already presented on this change in votes example at a previous NACIS. First, you create a simple renderer, and you create this new SIM symbol. SIM just stands for cartographic information model. It allows me to control over every aspect of the symbol, its shapes, its symbol layers, how to override things. I don't have time to get into the details of this. I did write a blog. I'll show you a link to it in just a second that gets into these details. But essentially, I created this multi-part symbol with offsets, and I assigned them an ID that shows that references a specific election, and that's the code for that. And then I need to set up overrides. So I override the color of each symbol layer, and I use arcade to return the color based off the winner. But I really want to also add margin of victory, so when I do that, I override the size, and again, the expression gets a little more complicated to return that size. But then you might be wondering, why are there so many gaps and overlaps in this symbol? Well, the symbol layers are still evenly spaced apart. It's just that when you resize them, that's how those overlaps and gaps happen. So I also need to override my X offset, because the offset is now different for each symbol layer. That's where this project got a lot more complicated. And took me a while to figure out. But that's the basic formula for figuring out. You just have to offset by half the symbol, which means you have to compute the size of each symbol that's next to the symbol layer. So again, gets complicated. But I was able to achieve it. This is an abbreviated version of that expression. And that's how you create it. But I'll show you a link to the blog for that. I want to finish off on just kind of comparing the strengths and weaknesses of each of these. With those winner maps, the winner plus margin and winner and lean, they're really good for showing who won, but they're not great for showing an overall trend. It takes a lot of effort. You have to use that slider, and then your brain has to try to figure out, well, where is it trending in Florida versus Wisconsin? How does it look? But they're good for showing results, and they're quick to grasp. With the swing maps, very similar. It's easy to see the party swings from the previous election, but it may give you information that's not quite as meaningful. So take the Arizona and Georgia 2020 to 2024 results, for example. Showing you those swings isn't really a trend. It could just be an outlier. So just take that for what it's worth. And it still takes some cognitive effort to try to figure out what the trend is. And same with this style too. But what I really like about this is it gets you into the detailed nuances, like what happened in Wisconsin in 2016, for example. And then with the trend boxes here, seeing the trend itself requires low cognitive effort, though at initial view, people are going to immediately be like, what am I looking at? I'm not quite sure what that is. So there is some effort up front to read the legend, to look at the examples and figure it out. But once you figure it out, it is a lot of fun to explore and try to look at the different patterns you see at various parts of the country. I still open this thing up and will explore different parts of the country that I am unfamiliar with and their voting patterns, and I'm always learning something new. So it's easy to see the dramatic changes, and it's also really good at showing those outliers, such as Arizona, Indiana, Georgia in previous elections. I did write a blog. This is a preview of the first page of it. I'll show you a link in just a second. So I get into all of the steps I described just now very briefly. But I just want to kind of close on this thought. I don't expect a map like this to go viral. It's not something that your typical audience would immediately understand and get. But I do think of exploring maps a lot similar to reading. So you have different media like pamphlets, signs, news headlines, summaries. It just takes a few seconds to scroll through and read them, and those are good for certain situations. But there's also situations where you want to just sit down with a novel, read a long-form article, and really get into some detail and understanding something. That's how I view this trend style here that I experimented with. It's really good for people who are willing to take time to explore the data, and it allows you to kind of get lost in the map and learn new things. I do want to acknowledge there's other ways of visualizing trends I didn't explore in this, but I do acknowledge them here, and there's probably others I left off. I just found these others a little more compelling and easier to explore and understand. And then when it comes to, so since I work on the development team for the web stuff at Esri, including ArcGIS Online. I did want to point out that with the time series expression, we do plan on adding a UI for that, so you don't have to get into Arcade if you're not familiar with it. Hopefully we have a simple way of doing that in the future. And we'll look at potentially adding trend as a style. But I want to thank you for coming out. I welcome your feedback. And scan that QR card, you get the links to the slides and all of the app and all of the blogs that I mentioned today. Thank you.
Taking off my cartographer hat and putting on my data viz hat, how come you didn't use a bar chart and used the size squares, which are harder to read?
Yeah, okay. No, you're perfectly fine. So, and it's totally valid question. So the first answer to that, I have kind of a couple of thoughts there. The first answer is a little lame, I'm sorry. One was we're technically limited in our software for bar charts there. So at least for the web, I'm not sure, I can't speak to ArcGIS Pro, but in the web we don't have that capability. So I didn't start there, though I think we have that capability more recently to stretch the symbols on the y-axis. So that is something I acknowledge on the slide too. It's like seeing differences in area of symbol is definitely cognitively harder than height. I also just liked the visual, quite frankly. It's a little different than your standard bar chart, but totally valid feedback.